BBC Radio Norfolk News. The next bulletin will be at 7 o'clock.
Now on BBC Radio Norfolk, we look back at the golden age of television announcers with, well, I'll leave one of the experts to introduce it, shall I?
You're tuned to Coming Up Next here on BBC Radio Norfolk. And here, coming up next, is the famous Tom Edwards, Katie Glass, David Clayton, and yours truly, Helen McDermott.
I'm Tom Edwards. I'm a Norwich guy born and bred and love my announcing times both at Anglia Television here in this fine city, Thames Television, Harlech Television, ATV, Tyne Tees, Border, Southern. I was there.
Top that. Hi, Katie Glass here, an announcer at Anglia Television in the early days. 1977 I started. I'm not quite sure when I finished because it went on forever and ever and ever, and we went out of vision sometime in the 80s. But I was there till 99 doing various jobs. It was a gas.
I'm Helen McDermott, and I came just after Katie, a couple of years later. I joined Anglia in 1979, and prior to that I'd been at Westwood Television, and prior to that the BBC in the West Country, Morning South West. And I was at Anglia for 26 years.
And I'm David Clayton, and I did about 1 year and a couple of months at Anglia. And that's it.
Don't you wonder sometimes about on vision?
I was a radio DJ. Initially, I used to work on cruise ships and things like that. And then I broke into radio. We're a little old radio all world down in Ipswich and did a couple of years there. And people were beginning to move into television. It seemed like a progression to look for a job that was appropriate in television. There was a whole host of people that worked at Radio World that broke into television at about the same time. And I applied for an announcer's job. I didn't actually get the first audition that I did. Same old people used to turn up year in, year out for those auditions, and finally broke in that way and was glad of it, really. But it was a very different world. It was a bit of a culture shock.
I was down in the West Country, and my first sort of foray into television, as it were, was to show people around the building at Westwood Television. I moved down there. My parents moved down to the West Country and bought what they call was a hotel, but in fact it was a B&B, but, you know, obviously we called it a hotel. And I'd just come out of college, and I trained as a dancer and a singer and the theatre. And so I was resting, as you do, and I thought, well, I better get some work. So I joined Hospital Radio, and I met a BBC producer in Hospital Radio, and I got a little bit of work on the local BBC station, but it wasn't enough money. It was £3 a week. Now I get 4, so things have improved vastly. Sure. And so I went to the television station and I said, I'm available, I'll do anything. You got any work? And they said, well, we do need a hostess to show people around the building and make tea for the stars of the 6 o'clock show. You know, people that we would have been considered were stars, you know. And to me, of course, they were God. I couldn't believe it that I was meeting these people. So I would make the tea and I'd introduce the guests to these presenters and reporters, and I'd say, well, no, and this is, I can't think of anybody's name, David Rogers and Judy Spires, and they will be asking you this. Anyway, I got to know jobs that were going around the television station. And Keith Fordyce, do you remember him?
Yes, I do. A disc jockey.
Yeah, Keith Fordyce.
Yeah.
Well, he did this thing called Treasure Hunt, and they needed a hostess to come on to Treasure Hunt on television to bring the guests down. And the girl that was supposed to do it got pregnant, so the director said to me, would you mind just filling in? Which is actually about 3 jobs I've had filling in for somebody who's got pregnant. Usually women, of course.
Yes.
And so So I said, yes, I'd love to. And he said it was something like £50 a day. I thought, well, I'm a millionaire now. So I got this job as a hostess on this quiz show called Treasure Hunt.
Struth, 50 quid a day.
It was a fortune.
What year was that, Helen, then?
Yes. Well, that was early 70s.
That's a lot of money in those days.
It was a lot of money. Yeah. And I was just, it wasn't every day, of course. It was like one show a week. But nevertheless, it was marvellous money. But that wasn't really in it for me. I just thought, I'm going to be on television. This is it. This is it. But I thought, I'm going to do this differently. I'm not just going to be any old presenter that walks down or hostess. I'm going to learn what these people do. I'm not going to come on with a card and say, this is Mary Smith and she likes gardening and she lives in Devonport or whatever, so I'm going to learn it. But of course what happened was I forgot it. So every time I'd come on, I'd say, this is Mary Smith. Oh dear, what do you do? So I actually got the HEVO from that job.
No, but again, the public love that kind of thing, don't they?
Well, they did.
Yes.
But anyway, cut a very, very long story short. Sorry, and it is rather long. I eventually found out that there was a job going in continuity from a girl who was pregnant, Jennifer Clulo.
Again.
And they said
a lot down there,
and they said you can have a go at it. And I was absolutely dreadful. I remember one of the first people I introduced was Fred Diniage.
Good name.
Fred Dinage, yeah.
And my sister rang in and she said, you've just called him Diniage. I said, well, I don't know. What's his name then? But I was absolutely dreadful. But somehow they allowed me to kind of get away with it.
We were given a lot of leeway. I was given 3 months training.
Well,
I actually
never had any training.
I shadowed Keith Martin for 3 months.
Yes.
And he told me all the ins and outs of what to say, and he was very precise about tautology. Mustn't be a tautologist. It's not but now. You don't need the but. It must be now.
Did you
Yes,
really?
no.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky, I suppose, looking back, being in the right place at the right time. I was on the staff of the BBC in London. And I'd spent about maybe 10 years of getting up at 3:30 in the morning. So I'd had enough. And I was looking to do something else. And I'd always admired the announcers at Thames Television, which covered a huge area in those days, and still does, of course. People like Peter Marshall and Philip Elsmore, and Diddy David Hamilton was also one of the announcers. So David said to me on the QT, saying, I think they're looking for somebody new, Tom. So I went to see the boss man, and he said, yes, I'll try you out for a day, but that's it, see how you get on. So I thought, am I giving up a BBC staff job?
What were you doing in the staff? What was the staff job?
I was news reading, announcing,
at 3 in the morning,
and doing the early show on radios 1 and 2. And I'd had enough of that. My life seemed to revolve around this one programme. So I left the staff of the BBC, and my first day at Thames, the crew liked me on site. I've always maintained that if the guys and girls who are on the other side of the glass like you, our job is done right. If they're going to have a problem, you get them out of it, and vice versa. And I loved my first day at Thames, and I ended up being there from about 1979 through until about 1988. But as soon as I became freelance at Thames in the year of 1979, you'll remember, ladies, there was the big ITV strike,
yes,
which went on and on and on. I was up at Newcastle doing continuity for Tyne Tees at their City Road studios, and my boss eventually said to me after 10 days, I think you better fly home to London, Tom. This is not going to be resolved. So ITV screens in those days were blanked, and all of us announcers had no work and no money coming in. It was a long strike that went on for nearly 3 months.
Well, I closed down Westwood Television, and then at the end of the strike, I opened up here at Anglia, because what I didn't say was I got the job at Anglia here because at Westwood they said to me, I got this job in continuity, they said, but if we find anybody better,
That's not very nice.
you won't have the job, which is not unusual. You get things all your life, don't you, really? So I thought, well, I can't hang around here just waiting for them to give me a job. I'll apply, now that I am experienced, albeit 3 months as a continuity announcer, to different companies. So I applied to Southern, as it was then, ATV, Anglia, and there was one other, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, I got auditions with all three.
Wow.
And actually all three, amazingly, offered me a job. And the reason I took the Anglia one was that it was a year's contract as opposed to 6 months.
Yeah.
So, but I came up here and more or less sort of opened it up.
After the strike.
I'm plugging in my switching on, tuning in, and everything I'm looking at,
was still at school here in Norwich, and Anglia Television had just started up in 1959, and I cycled home to watch the opening night of Anglia. And I was fascinated by the announcers at that time, who were Drew Russell, Colin Bower, and Newman Sanders. And if you look up on YouTube, you can actually see the opening of Anglia Television. And I used to watch these people coming up in vision, announcing the next programme, and I thought, this is fantastic, because the programme starts after they've just finished announcing it. How does that all work?
And Tom, it was very, very different in those days, wasn't it? Because there wasn't anything like that in television.
No, the public had never seen anything
Never,
like it.
no.
And you're right, Helen, because I can remember people like Drew Russell, who was a very good-looking guy. He was the chief announcer. He would walk down London Street or through Norwich Market, and he would stop the traffic.
Yeah.
And both you and Katie know that really in East Anglia, you became a star name on television.
Absolutely, and because a lot of people, with continuity, the whole point of it was linking the programmes throughout the day or throughout the night, depending on which shift you were on. And we started very early in the morning, didn't we, Katie?
Absolutely.
With this 3-minute or 3.5-minute piece of Handel's water music. Was it 3.5 minutes? Or
It was a
longer?
very long time.
It was a very long time of the night going round
Yep.
and odd scenes. And there was one occasion, because that was the very first thing that happened very early in the morning. And so you didn't have to be made up, actually, because we didn't come into vision till a little bit later on. And Christine Webber came in with her rollers in one morning, sat down behind the desk, put the opening music came on, and it went off. So the director, or whatever, what they won't call director, transmission controller, outside said, "I'm going to have to come to you. I'm going to have to come to you." And she's sitting there with her rollers in. So up he puts her in the shot, and she's going, "Well, good morning. This is Anglia TV, and today, later on, we'll have the Sooty Show and Coronation Street. And but in the meantime, let's hope that we can get a little bit more music." Anyway, so she just fumbled away. And then later on, when they'd sorted it all out, about an hour later, she came on to introduce the first programme, because I think they went straight into a film or something. She said, "Well, hello, good morning. I'm ready for you now." And you thought...
And also, the public love that kind of thing, don't they? Something that's so impromptu. I mean, we used to sweat when things went wrong, girls, right?
Dreadful.
But the public loved it when things went wrong.
Yeah, but it was awful, though, wasn't it?
Same kind of thing happened to dear old Keith Martin, who I think had actually slept in the studio, having done a late shift the night before, and was suddenly thrown in vision unexpectedly with a good night's stubble on his chin, looking very bleary. And in desperation, he ran to wardrobe, and there was a wig in wardrobe from a drama, which he put on his head, just to make him look totally absurd. I think he was sacked within the hour.
Well, Keith
was famous for being sacked.
David, had you come from radio to do some TV at that time?
I tried to audition for Anglia 2 or 3 times, and you got the job I tried to audition for.
I'm awfully sorry.
No, it's okay. No, it was yours. I mean, they wanted another woman. They couldn't say that, but to balance up the male and female, they wanted another woman. But Ray Castle, who was the deputy head of presentation, had said to me he'd recognised me from DJing at the Ocean Room, because he was involved in the pub trade as well.
He ran the mustard pot, didn't he?
He did run the mustard pot
in Norwich.
And he'd seen me on stage playing records, and he recognised me because he's watching the auditions on his monitor, and he called me up and he said, "You're the DJ from the Ocean Room." Yeah, and that was kind of a connection. He said, "Look, we do need some people to stand in," so gave me some shifts, and really I got an audition in Vision, really, and he put me on 2 evenings in January about 1982, and you looked after my first link, Helen, because I went to and I did my first link. Now it's time for House Party. Do you remember House Party from Southern Television? And I did the link as well as I could, and I had a very good TC who was going to give me exactly 8 seconds. It wasn't going to be 15 or 3. He was going to hold freeze frames to give me 8 seconds. So I did House Party, and I looked, and House Party came up, but I didn't know it had come up with no sound. And so my very first link was a programme which came up the line faulty with no sound.
No.
And I wasn't sure what I should be listening to. And then you panicked for me
I?
And said, well, we can't do this. So they put up a holding announcement about there's a fault.
No.
And then I went to a survival special, standby programme, Survival, the elephant that walked on air. Now that's emblazoned.
My goodness, you remember it.
Because that was my first link, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Yeah, your first links must have been terrifying, were they?
Absolutely. I spent most of my time going backwards and forwards to the loo, in between every bit. I absolutely, because the thing with continuity was it was live. The only way you could learn how to do it was to do it, and that was the problem.
And learn by your mistakes.
Yeah. When I was when I was at in Westwood Television, actually, we had a similar thing with the opening, which happened to Christine, which came down here, but when it broke down. But I had to fill for 3 minutes, and I was really new to it. And they put me up in Vision, and I had the TV times, and you talk for 3 minutes about the programmes that are coming up. Anyway, and I said later on today, and I went through the whole thing, fumbled my way through it. Thank goodness nobody recorded it. It was so embarrassing. And I'd read out the day before. So I'd read out all the wrong programmes. But this was the thing. You just had to do it. That was the only way. And really look stupid a lot of the time.
Katie always said, you said to me, always have a minute of nothing you can talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it doesn't... As long as you've got a minute in your head, you can get out of anything. And I think you said, or Helen said... always use the phone. It's not connected to anything, but you can always kill a couple of 30 seconds.
You can get 30 seconds out of, you can get 30 seconds out of a phone.
Yes, but you can use thinking time while you're having an imaginary conversation with the transmission controller, while you're thinking about what you're going to say, and hopefully they're communicating with you about something that they're going to fill with.
I found it very strange because when you sit in the studio, we just had a camera there. There was nobody working it. You'd have operators sitting outside, the transmission controllers.
Yeah, but let me just stop there. It was a camera with its guts hanging out, wasn't it? It wasn't like a proper camera.
True.
It was like it was the skeleton of a camera that they got rid of.
Well, that's true, because you would attach the autocue to the front of it, which was a big box, which is probably why it looked like it had its guts hanging out. Because
it was also robotic.
When you
attached the early robotic cameras.
So it would suddenly strangely move. And do you remember we had one which had a fault that kept cutting down to your elbow? While you were sitting there, so you're in Vision. You start talking, and suddenly it would go down to your elbow. So you didn't know whether you should go down with it.
You wanna love to last forever, one that will never fade away. I wanna help you with your problem. Stick around, I say, it's coming on. It's coming on. Coming on like a flower.
It's a bit of a shock having to worry about what you look like and all this business of getting used to talking to a camera. And the magic line was, treat it like your granny. But all the transmission controllers were very precise about what they did. I mean, I didn't fall off a log like our Tom here, who seems to have taken to it terribly well. I can remember sitting down and writing my scripts for my 10 seconds, and I would write 7 seconds just in case. I would write a minute just in case, and sit and rehearse them very nervously for fear, because the transmission controllers, in whose mercy you were, had their own idiosyncrasies. I can't say that, but you know what I mean. And some would just throw you up, and some would freeze the last promo, so you had that little minute to gather your thoughts, and so you had to be prepared for anything. And I found, certainly to begin with, that terribly nerve-wracking, because I couldn't put on a record to cover the gap. I was the record.
Yes.
And so, actually filling and being able to cut words, this business of 3 words a second. So I'd sit there and I'd count my 3 words a second for my 10-second link and think, which words can I drop suddenly if it becomes 7 seconds? So I found it very hard. It did take me at least, 20 years. No, it took me 3 months to 6 months to kind of just get used to the discipline of the job, let alone the idea that you've got to remember to smile and be a bit friendly and end on an up.
I did it my way. I used to get the sort of routine sheets. If it said on the routine sheet, Tom in Viz, 10 seconds. When you came to that spot, it was never 10 seconds. It might be 4 seconds, it might be 6 seconds. It might be, as I found out one fateful night, where I had to ad-lib for nearly 6 minutes to a camera with a copy of the TV Times. And things were never as it was on the routine sheet. You had to be very, very flexible, and you had to cope with that. I mean, I used to see some transmission controllers hold on to a freeze frame for a new announcer, so he or she would have exactly 10 seconds. But I didn't like it like that. I think that was my role as a disc jockey. I'd like to rock and roll into an announcement. So I threw all scripts away unless there was an announcement to the network or a party political broadcast. And I treated the camera really like a microphone and a turntable. And the bosses must have okayed that because I was at Thames and other ITV stations for quite a long time. I mean, one night I think I was at ATV in Birmingham, and I said on behalf of all of us here at our... And I said, I've forgotten exactly where I am. Because I think I'd done Anglia, Southern, Thames, and somewhere else, ATV, all in the space of a week. So I actually forgot where I was, yeah.
Initially, I would spend, like Katie, a lot of my time rehearsing what I was going to do in between. And there was one time when I was rehearsing, I think it was about a 30-second, I think that's what was anticipated, a 30-second link. And I was rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing it. And then all of a sudden, the transmission controller, he said, "What on earth are you doing? You're in Vision." So I'd been rehearsing it in Vision, not knowing that I'd actually put myself up. So I suddenly went, "Ah!" when I saw my face. Yes, I think, actually, as time went on, it became rather a boring job, actually, because you would sometimes sit there for a 3-hour film, and then you'd have to get yourself psyched up. What we would do is I used to take my ironing in, and while there was a long film on, I used to do the ironing in the background. And so that was quite one way of actually...
Christine was brilliant at having cat naps, I remember.
Was she?
I was
Yeah.
so envious and come in to change shifts and find her snoozing in the chair. How can you do that?
And then she
10
suddenly
minutes and
wake
she'd wake
up,
up refreshed.
did she?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I probably chatted. I was a bit of a gossip. I had a nice good chat with everybody, sit in the old control room and catch up with everybody's
It would
news.
depend on, wasn't it, who was outside, because some of them you couldn't get a word in anyway, and I used to dread
True.
being on with them. I think, oh no, I've got 3 hours, they're going to come in. But I won't name them.
No.
But that
But I
was...
seem to remember I did a few odd shifts at Anglia Television. I seem to remember there was only one transmission controller. That was it. Whereas at Thames there was a whole bank of engineers.
Oh, no, there was
No, latterly. I mean, initially, when I first started, there was a transmission controller, inevitably a bloke at that stage.
The logist?
And then the logist, which was, well, we were putting out the commercials and they all had to have their allocated time. So if it said 30 seconds on the sheet, it had to get 30 seconds or it wouldn't pay for it. So if it got 29 and a half, you were in doo-doos. If the transmission controller clipped it to come to Tom in Vision prematurely so he could have that extra time. So they sat there and said, no, Kellogg's went out, no, whatever it was. And they would type up on an old-fashioned typewriter in the corner and monitor. And in a way, they were kind of like a PA. They were almost able to count the transmission controller in and out of breaks and in and out of promos. Obviously, if the promos promoting the programmes got cut, it didn't matter. But they sat in the corner typing away and counting and having stopwatches and adding up in 60s.
The thing about continuity, and I'm not sure we really, in a way, we need to explain exactly what continuity announcer did, which was having to meet a time from stations coming from all over the country.
Yeah.
So, say, for example, you had 30 seconds and it was 1 minute to the hour, you would have to meet that time because every station all over the country were meeting that time, weren't they?
So it was going to start whether you'd finished talking or not.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
The programme would start whatever. So that was the skill, of course, was talking.
I think timing was really the most... You had to look and sound good, obviously, but your timing had to be spot on, because if you crashed that ident... I mean, Granada's ident, you could sit on because it's a stationary ident on the Granada programmes. But if you're going to something like, I think it was TSW or STV or ATV, you had to hit that ident.
Dung, wasn't it?
You had to hit it on the nose.
Yeah. In many ways, it was easier to have a longer time because you could sort of get into your stride. If you've got 4 seconds, very difficult to know what to say and be effective, although... Keith Martin, who you've mentioned, was absolutely brilliant. And I know he would sometimes say to them, I only want something like 2 seconds. And there was once when he was introducing doctors or whatever, he just went, and now for our next programme, nurse.
Yes.
And that was it. And he was the master of just absolutely... doing it in very short words. Patrick Anthony, when he introduced Hawaii 5-0, he said, and now Mary Peters has asked me if I'll give her a big wave. And of course up came da-da-da-da-da-da with the wave. So those little ones were quite good. I introduced Superman, actually, where I asked 2 of the not the transmission controllers, but the engineers, to come and hold my legs up at the back, I sat with as if I was sorry, Tom's looking at me in a very strange way. I looked as if I was flying. So they held
was this chroma key or
no, this was so you couldn't see them, but they held my legs down below. I looked like I was flying. I had my arms outstretched and I had a pair of funny glasses on, and I just said, "I've just come to help Superman save the world," and that was it. And I still get people saying that they remember that. So the shorter ones were great if you could work it that way, but the long ones gave you a chance, I suppose, to say.
Be dreadful if there was a breakdown and you were stuck there with your legs up
no,
for a minute filling.
That,
Yes.
I'm saying nothing.
But actually, it was rarely would you get a minute. Really, would you? I mean, I suppose sort of 20 seconds, 30 seconds. One would hope that they'd get rid of a minute. Although I did have to fill for 6 minutes at one time. I was with Patrick and BC.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that particular night with the 6 minute. It wasn't just us at Thames. Dougie Fairbairn was the transmission controller that night. And I didn't wear an earpiece. We didn't have an earpiece in the studio in those days. And he just shouted at me, said, "All my sources have gone down. I'm coming to you now." I heard him scream, "Cut and cue Tom." And all I could see in my right-hand side in that small little studio was colour bars in my preview monitor. So I thought, the next source isn't there. And it was not only for us, but it was for you girls up here in Anglia and throughout the ITV network.
If you've just tuned in, we've got 3 continuity announcers in the studio, ex-continuity announcers, and 4 if you count me. We've got Tom Edwards, who's on Thames and Harlech and all over the place, Katie Glass, Helen McDermott, both from Anglia, and I did a bit on Anglia in the BBC as well. And we're just sort of reminiscing about that art of the continuity announcer. And although in the continuity studio you were sort of miles away from anywhere, little cubby hole with a camera in and lights and everything, and that was it. But the rest of the television station was going on over there. But this is my question now. How many famous people did you bump into if you were stuck in continuity? Possibly in Thames a little more than Anglia, but Anglia did great dramas, didn't they, Katie? I mean,
they did, and in fact, this idea that we were completely stuck in the studio, maybe I was a bit maverick, but I wandered around quite a lot, especially if there was a film on in the afternoon, and you'd sit in the makeup and wardrobe departments and chat, and certainly, you met everybody that was, if there was a drama going on, you'd tag along because it was sort of a happening place to be, and it was interesting. And I remember meeting everybody, don't you?
Well, they did Tales of the Unexpected.
Yeah.
And so, because there was one canteen, you'd often meet them in your lunch break or whatever in the canteen, and there were lots of very famous people. Ralph Richardson, Wendy Hiller, I'm trying to think of all the names. Joan, did you?
I did, because the makeup artist, no names, no pact, was a little bit tired and emotional.
Yes.
And I was sort of taken aside and said, there's no makeup artist here. Could you please put Dame Wendy Hiller's false eyelashes on? No. Fortunately, I'd worn them in the 70s, so I just about knew where to put the glue. And I thought, whenever I saw her on Tales of the Unexpected or whatever it was she was in, I did her makeup. Multi-skilling, I tell you.
Well, Joan Collins, and I remember wearing one of her hats when I went to Newmarket races, and somebody laughed at me because I had this hat on, which had belonged to Joan Collins. It's hard to remember all the names of people, but you were always bumping into somebody.
John Gielgud, Rex Harrison, I can remember bumping into and sitting
Ralph
down.
Bates.
And they all stayed at the old Royal Hotel, which was directly opposite Anglia House, wasn't it?
Yes, well, by the time that I was there, I think it had just been taken over as our offices, to be honest. They stayed at the Maid's Head sometimes.
Okay.
And places like that.
So, Tom, at Thames, you were dripping in stars, weren't you?
Yes, indeed. I've just written a list, is that I've been in the business, in the media, for all of my life, and I'm still starstruck, always have been, always will be. And I remember going in for an evening shift one day, and there was this dirty old 4x4 parked outside the Euston Road studios, and I went into the gents, and who was I standing next to but His Royal Highness Sir Prince Philip. And I would go into makeup. There was a lovely woman called Mimi Kimmins, who was head of makeup, and she needed her work on me when I had a bit of a rough night the night before. And there would be people coming in for a magazine programme that Thames did live called Afternoon Plus. So I've just written down a list of people that I met who was Zsa Zsa Gabor, Leslie Caron, Margaret Thatcher came in when she was Prime Minister, complained about the flowers in the studio, Lord Snowden, and the one and only Miss Betty Davis. I'm a great fan of Betty Davis. So she came in live one day, and I was starstruck. Yeah.
Quite interesting, though, that sometimes if you were in the canteen and they had audiences in, and this showed you what continuity was, they would know us more than some of these famous names, which was really weird, because I suppose they'd watched us more so, hadn't they? You were there all day and all night with them.
I always remember Bob Wellings, and I think it was at the 50th anniversary of Anglia, not so long ago, who was saying, us announcers, presenters, whatever, were very well known in East Anglia, but as soon as we got off the train at London Liverpool Street, we got into a crowd, nobody knew who we were.
And that was the bonus, I thought.
Yeah.
I always thought that was the best bit about it, because it was in a bubble.
I couldn't imagine that anybody was watching. I found it really strange, and quite rightly you said when we were taught, if we were taught, as it were, that you should just think about not necessarily your granny, but just a person out there that you're talking to. So I was really surprised. If I go out, I was absolutely amazed that anybody recognised me at all. And in my case, because I'm what I think we now call vertically challenged, short, people would always say, gosh, you're much shorter than you look on TV. And I said, yes, well, you know, I am standing down a hole at the moment, which they wouldn't laugh, obviously. Very, very personal. They would say, you're much thinner than you look on TV. As the years went on, you're much younger than you look on TV. Don't like what you were wearing last night. Didn't like your hair. You would, of course, get nice letters, but you would only remember the horrible ones. Yeah. And I had one woman who wrote to me and said she didn't like anything about me at all, including the way I breathed. And I said, well, because I read this out on a letter spot, and I said, well, in many ways I agree with you, but I do need to breathe. But people would be very personal. And my mother used to get really annoyed, because if she came with me to a fete, she'd say, look at them putting their arm around you, as if they're... Because when you're short, people always lean on you, of course. You know, that's one of the things that people do, because they sort of think they can, I suppose. But I was always surprised. And if I'd go and open a fete, and this was in the early days, they would be queuing down the road to get your autograph. And I think, me?
Why?
Do they want me? It was almost... I always felt that I was somebody else. And I still feel that actually that Helen McDermott is not me at all. You know, that is somebody that's doing this job, and hopefully I'm doing a reasonable job. I mean, a lot of people who find it very irritating, I'm sure, but that's not actually me, because what happens is I go home, I have to get the dinner, I have to clean the cat's tray, you know, you get the washing out, you do the ironing while you're doing continuity. Life goes on absolutely the same. And I honestly didn't take this job thinking that I wanted to be famous.
No, likewise.
I took the job because I needed the money. And I thought, other than acting, this is a year's contract that I've got. It became very difficult as the years went on, though, because particularly, and I'm not sure how Tom would find this, but you are not allowed to get older as a woman. And I know this is very much a subject still for debate, and it was very, very difficult, not necessarily because bosses didn't want you, although some didn't, but actually the public, in truth, don't particularly want to see an old face. And I found that very difficult.
We're talking ageism here, aren't we?
We are, but I do understand that it's very difficult. And it's a dilemma with a woman that, do you go and, if you can afford it, go and have your face done? I mean, my hair started to go grey when I was really quite young, but I thought, well, I don't think I can go grey yet. I mean, I was in my 20s. And strangely enough, I'm going blonde now. It's weird how these things happen, isn't it? But I think that became very, very hard, a very hard thing to accept, that you were getting older, your popularity is waning, there's no question of that, because new people are coming along, and that is difficult. And I still accept that that's how it is, but in some ways you still almost expect people to know who you are, because I got so used to it.
I I'd had a monicum of fame on the radio, but of course, you know, your voice, you have to actually talk before anyone can recognise you. But being seen in the street, the thing that I was sort of devastated by were the fan letters. 99%, of course, were favourable. But just occasionally you'd get, "I couldn't stand your jumper last night. What were you thinking of wearing that?" And it would actually cut to the quick. It took quite a while to get a thick enough skin to cope with the fact that you were being well known and owned by people in a way that you couldn't go down the laundrette without your makeup on. Our head of PR, I suppose, Brenda Monteith, bless her cotton socks, would always insist that we never went out in trousers, would always insist that we didn't wear jeans or leather jackets or anything like that, and we always had to go out with our makeup on, because we weren't paid 24 hours a day, you understand, but we were the ambassadors for the station. So there was a sort of constant pressure on you, really, to perform all the time, and that was a bit of a shock. Of course, you take to it. It's a curate's egg, isn't it? You know, on the one hand, there's the downside, that you're always asked for your autograph when you look your worst and you're lumbering up the street with lots of shopping. But on the plus side, of course, you know, you get tables in restaurants, or you used to get tables in restaurants. You know what I mean.
In this day and age of the internet, there's lots of stuff on YouTube. I've seen you on YouTube, I've seen you on YouTube.
Look a bit different, though.
And we all look much younger in those days. But looking back on those days of being an announcer, I did enjoy. I used to get very bored. I mean, the money was good. Being a freelancer, dashing around the country, it nearly killed me. But it was just hearing that studio clock going tick-tock, tick-tock, and I think, I've got another 11 hours to do. And you were talking about how popular you are. I mean, we came into people's homes every day, so they regarded us as part of their furniture in a way. And another anecdote, if I can tell you about, which wasn't so pleasant, is that one day at Thames in the afternoon, security rang me up and said, "Look, there's an old boy who says that he knows you and wants to see you." And I forgot about the phone call, and security rang back again. So I went down to the main reception at Thames Television, their studios in Euston Road. And there sat this gentleman on a sofa. He looked about 70-odd, looked quite harmless. And I remember with a walking stick. And I remember this walking stick because it had a silver top to it. So eventually security said, "Look, we need to get rid of him. Will you just come down and have a word with him? He wants to see you." So I went down and I said, "Yes, nice to meet you. What can I do for you?" So he said, "My wife and I want to know why Falcon Crest has been taken off the air." Now, Falcon Crest was a very popular American soap opera with Jane Wyman, which we used to show in the afternoon. So I said, "Well, it's actually nothing to do with me." He said, "Yes, but my wife and I watch you introduce it." I said, "But I can tell you it's nothing to do with me." I said, "Well, what you need to do is to write to Brian Cowgill, who then was the managing director of Thames," and I went and got him a piece of paper and a pencil, wrote it all down for him. And as I turned away from this man, he said, "We're furious that Falcon Crest has been taken off," and gave me such a crack across the head. So security jumped on the man. He was arrested. I carried on with the rest of my shift out of vision. And it suddenly made me realise that there's a very fine edge, that when you're a public figure, whether you're in radio or television, there's an edge because people know who you are, but we don't know who they are. So I'm not trying to frighten you girls, or you, David, but it was something that was so unexpected.
I can remember going, as the years went on, going to fetes and things, and certainly in the early days, you would be mobbed. People would come over to you and want your autograph. And there was one occasion, I think it was sadly after Jill Dando, when I thought, do you know, anybody could have come up to me at any of this time, and just because they don't like the way that you look on TV, could have a knife or anything, because you were not surrounded. We didn't have anybody coming out with us. I mean, we just went off and opened a fete. And I think that was the first time I suddenly thought, gosh, this could be a little bit dangerous. Yeah. Also, some of the letters you would get were strange. They would say very strange things. But there was one funny letter where this chap sent me a very nice letter. In with it were a pair of knickers. And he wrote, he said, "Every time you wear a brooch on television, I know that you're wearing these knickers." And the thing that annoyed me was that they were like about a size 60, and I was tempted to write back and say, actually, I'm a size 6, But you would get very weird things like that, and you couldn't really answer them, but you get very strange letters. I don't know whether you did.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you?
And indeed, I had a stalker for a time and police protection for a couple of weeks.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because they got used to it. I mean, I didn't live too far away from the studios when I first came up. And I used to walk home, and it was only sort of half a mile. And, of course, people knew you said good night, night, and from everybody here, and sleep tight, and you'd shut down, and out you go the front door. And this guy used to follow me home and broke into my house, yeah. And that was extremely creepy. Yes.
What happened? Did they...
Well, I screamed a lot. That's what happened. Actually, funnily enough, you don't know how much you can scream until you start screaming, and I couldn't stop screaming. So much so that I did my throat in and couldn't go to work for several days afterwards. But I got 24-hour police protection.
What happened to the guy?
Never found. I mean, what made it creepy, having broken into my home, inasmuch as he followed me in, which wasn't difficult, and before I could shut the door after me, I didn't even know he was following me, he just retreated when the screaming got too much for him. He didn't look at all alarmed by my screaming, which made me even more alarmed. You want a reaction, don't you? But it was Mandell's Court I was living in, just down the road.
Dear, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And,
which is right at the city centre, isn't it?
It is. And so the police came fairly swiftly and surrounded the area, but never tracked him down. It was never found. I moved very quickly.
Did anybody
got
ever...
taxis after that.
What I want to ask you girls about, when I used to come and visit Mum when I lived in London, I used to watch you girls with TC, or was it BC? BC. I used to watch you girls with BC, and I'm dying to find out who BC was. And I mean, you used to get away with murder sometimes.
Oh, no, over to Helen for this one.
Well, not really. Well, BC was real, of course, Tom.
Was he?
If you don't believe that, we did have a lot of fun under the table. It is varied, really, because the logists would sometimes be BC, and some of them didn't particularly want to do it, but there was one that was particularly violent when she did it, and she would cause absolute mayhem, and she cut off Michael Speake's tie as BC. But it was really interesting with BC because I'd introduced the idea of a puppet to the station after I came from Westwood Television, where we had Gus Honeybun, which was a rabbit. And some people might, if they lived in the West Country, would know Gus Honeybun. And when I came up here, there was nothing. And I said, it's lovely if it's your birthday and you get a card read out, but what about the other children who are watching and it's not their birthday? It'd be nice to have something. And Anglia said, no, we don't want anything like that. I said, well, let's give it a try. No. Anyway, eventually they said, well, all right. And so Vera up the road made BC, and they thought it would only last a matter of weeks. And Vera did a very good job, but it wasn't the best of puppets, I would say.
Became a cult.
But it caught on. And they used to watch us up at the UEA. The students would take time out, it shows you how busy they were, to actually watch BC. And it did become a cult. And in fact, I don't know about you, Katie, but I still get asked all the time, where is BC? And this is how many years on? And BC actually is in the East Anglian Archive, I have to say.
Is he?
Hanging up like that, which is probably how I'll end up.
Is he really?
Yeah, well, apparently he is. So it stood for Birthday Club, because
it also stood for Brooker and Castle.
Did it?
Well, I was told that.
Oh, no,
because they were our two bosses.
Well, yes, but it had its own book. It had the BC Mobile, which still exists, I have to say.
I keep seeing them at car boot sales. The book's everywhere.
And it's there's quite a lot of BC on YouTube. But you see, it's like all these things that they... after that, you had Gordon the Gopher and quite a lot of them, because you latch on to something like that. And this was the thing, is I was always coming in with ideas that nobody wanted to do. Nothing's changed in that respect. But I always think that if you give something, even if people don't like it, if you know what I mean, they remember it. And that was the whole point of it, really.
It's a bit like everything else, isn't it? You have your days. You have your days when you're very grateful for BC, because you can pad out the time. You haven't got enough cards. You can and saying, how are you today? And what do you mean? And what are you wearing? And, oh, don't you like my jumper? So you can have this phony conversation, which was terribly helpful. But then, of course, it could be very annoying, as I'm sure you remember, David.
Well,
on your time.
Yeah, you see, I was the announcer in Vision, and this Katie Glass was the announcer who was doing the puppet. Because if you did the evening shift, you came in and did a bit of relief for
That's true, in the
tea
afternoon.
time, didn't you?
Yeah,
and you'd do the puppet. And Katie's under the desk doing the puppet, which involved two hands, one in his hand, one holding a little wooden pole.
That's right.
Yeah, and BC was quite animated, and I'm trying to do my very best to read out the birthday cards, and because Katie, being an experienced announcer, could see the clock and knew I was just coming up to the end of the link, and managed perfectly to time BC with her hand in his paw, so it's a real hand in there, yank my tie in the last second. And gentlemen will know this, ladies may not. If you yank a tie tightly, or if you yank it, it tightens to the tightest little knot.
Yes, it does.
That you cannot undo. And we thought it was very funny. You knew what you were doing, Katie. I
don't remember this. I deny it all.
Yes. Well, it's no good. I remember. And for the next programme, which was about a 50-minuter, unfortunately, I couldn't get this knot undone. And BC was a little rascal, wasn't he?
He could be.
Well,
we certainly had some fun.
My daughter is now in her 30s. When she was little, she had some of those dealy boppers, which is like the little hairband, isn't it, with two springs on, with little round baubles on the top, right? And they were just all the rage. And I was doing a shift at Anglia, and I was going in, so I thought, I'll take these in. BC could wear this will be so good, because BC could. Oh yeah, right. So I went in, and it was the logist, who I just remember she was a bit grumpy, and I think you said, she'll never do BC. She doesn't do BC. She's not going to do BC. And I'd gone in with these dealy boppers, and I'd sort of put them in the transmission controller's room and said, I've brought these dealy boppers. Oh, right, okay. So she could see that I'd planned, obviously, a very big comedy routine with BC with these dealy boppers, and she did it for me. She did it for me. And she got down beside me, because you had to crouch down at the desk, didn't you, if you're operating BC. This is blowing the whole myth. He's not real. He was a puppet. And so I put the dealy boppers on, and of course she's overacting the dealy boppers. You didn't need to move the head much for them to spring backwards and forwards. So I'm going, well, BC, they're good, aren't they? No, BC was over this side. Well, BC, they're good, aren't they? And so BC did this a little bit, and one of them fell off. And it was a round green ball. And I started to say, in Birthday Club, oh, BC, you've lost one of your... And the next word was in my head. And
but you didn't say it.
Somehow it stopped. And there was a pause while I searched for another word. Baubles! You've lost one of your baubles!
Don't. I can remember Michael Speak mispronouncing. He did a lot of mispronouncing. The Chomps Elsie was a famous one. And the Chomps Elsie for Champs-Élysées.
Oh, we see.
And he also said the Grand Prix. For the Grand Prix. Yeah, no, a classic.
Stephanie Grappelli.
Yes, there were many of them. When you suddenly hadn't read a script before, you had to read it out loud, and live would become live. That was a very easy thing to do. The other one, of course, that's etched in my memory is the days when we used to record commercials. When the programme was going out, we'd be given our little 10-second script to sort of talk about so-and-so Ford selling whatever, which went out over dead slides. They were awfully creaky-looking commercials. And they left the microphone up, and you had a massive sort of 35 words for 10 seconds, and you somehow had to squeeze them in, shoehorn them in. And I was going like a train in the middle of this thing, and the words were just tripping, and I said some expletives in the middle of it. I stopped and said, oh, I've it up. Oh, no, I haven't. Oh, well, I have now. And I did it, and it was, and the moment I came out of the studio, the phone was ringing, and first person that got through was a viewer saying, glad you're human. The second phone call was the programme controller dismissing me. And I made the nationals for that one. It was, in fact, the transmission controller's error, but I mean, you can't say that, because it unfortunately, it was a children's programme it was going out over.
Oh, ouch.
And it gets even worse because, I mean, I can't remember what it was now, but it was a little children's drama, a teenage drama, I should say. And it was a very tense moment between this couple, and the boy was silent, and he just obviously said something romantic to the girl, and the girl was silent, and there was this gap. And all that went out was some effing and blinding from my studio. But the unions marshalled my case, and I was reinstated the week after. But it did make the nationals, the tabloids. I was reputedly the first announcer, certainly, to have said the dreaded F word on air. And I remember the day, it was October the 8th, because I'd given up smoking that day.
I remember when something was on and I was sitting in the transmission controller's room, the TC as he's known, next door, and he could look through a window at the announcer studio. I was in there with him, we were just chatting. He said, "We've got a new Grass Valley mixer." I went, right, okay.
That's exciting.
Right, it's a Vision mixer, and it had been installed. It'd been installed at the front building, the front bit of Anglia House, and he said, "Oh, it's great! They cut this up and they mix that." And
I remember.
So we went through, and this room was called the Transmission Editing and Recording Suite. So they had an acronym, right? TEARS. Right, the acronym was
that's
TEARS,
right. Yeah, I remember that vaguely.
Transmission Editing and Recording Suite.
Gosh,
and he took me through there, and he started to show me, and I know there's a film on. Well, I didn't have to worry there was a film on, but there's a commercial break every 15 minutes. And he's in there, and he's showing me all this, and we're watching it, and then somebody rushes through and said, "You've missed the commercial break!"
Oh, no.
And the transmission controller went, "Oh, my goodness." And he rushed through, and somehow they had to put all these commercials in instead of promos. And the log said, "Commercial break missed. Announcer and TC in tears."
I like it.
See?
Oh, that's nice.
Very good,
I know
very
which TC that was.
Probably you do.
Yeah. Do you remember rehearsing for the death of the Queen Mother?
Yes, we
Which
used to
we
do
did
dry
endlessly,
runs
yes, absolutely.
with ITN.
And she never died. Well, not while I was there, anyway.
There was a scare, wasn't there, when she got a fishbone stuck in her throat?
Yes. What was it? Operation Beauselines, was it? What was it? Operation something or other? We all had a booklet and we had to know exactly.
And the
what
royal
we
family
would do.
came in order, didn't they? Obviously
Yeah.
the Queen at the top, but then it would be...
When I was at the BBC doing sort of continuity out of Vision, we used to punch up a globe, but a globe from Norwich, not a globe from London. And we used to have to do it. And I remember we had a close down, and Judy Lyons, who people will remember, was on Anglia and then went to BBC. Judy was the main sort of announcer continuity person doing news at BBC East. And they used to then do a close down. They used to do a regional close down. And they used to have a cartridge. It's a thing with tape in it, in which you put music. We don't use them now. And it had the national anthem on, or it just had Queen on it. This cartridge used to go in, used to say, "And now it's time to close down." And they press a button, it would play the tape. And then over in the corner, because they were always worried that wouldn't work, there was one marked "Spare Queen."
It's such a great shame that I think not only ITV, but the BBC to a certain extent, the local identification has actually gone with the in-vision announcers. It might make me sound a bit old-fashioned, but I'm so sorry that those days have gone.
The sun always shines on TV.
I think the point certainly was to meet all the other stations that were coming to this one programme at the same time. So, for example, and we used to call it 00, at 0800, it would be Coronation Street. All the stations throughout the region would have to meet at that time. So the continuity announcer was really the buffer in between the commercial and the programme. But I think more than that, it was company for people in their homes. I think we were seen as a friend. We were there to guide them through the evening. In many ways, we were actually more important than we were. And some people used to tune in just to watch the continuity announcer. But it was a way of linking the whole evening together. And probably in those days, people would sit and watch a whole evening, more so than now when they dip out.
Yes,
dip
there was brand loyalty, wasn't there? There were people that would watch all day, and their regional station was their home. And I think there was a sense that we were the brand. Pre-logos, we were the brand, and people were watching with us, which is why dear old Patrick used to say at the end of the day, and if you're watching alone, a special good night to you. And there was that sense of that one-to-one. And I think from the management's point of view, not only obviously, technically, we were extremely useful and expedient for meeting these awful deadlines, but we were the brand. We were, as, if we couldn't go out in our jeans, we were the ambassador and the face and the identity of the station. until it became corporate. I mean, the moment we started having flags that wobbled about, in fact, really sort of the moment of Channel 4's arrival, when things started to have logos and there was sort of Saatchi and Saatchi knocking around, we became dated. The powers that be wanted to move on to a new kind of image and a slickness.
And they wanted to make it faster, you're right,
Yeah.
because that's why we were considered, I suppose, to slow things up if we were in vision. The word continuity, if I'm right, means to link up from one thing to the other. So we folks, we were the live hosts or hostess, male or female, and an era which hopefully after today's programme will never, ever be forgotten.
You've been listening to Coming Up Next on BBC Radio Norfolk. In the programme you heard from Tom Edwards, Katie Glass, Helen McDermott and David Clayton. The programme was produced by David Clayton and Paul Hayes.